The wind was the first to know each spring, rattling the window panes and curling between the narrow lanes of the village where every house seemed to lean for shelter against its neighbor. Beyond the bricks and faded planks, the sea spoke in patient sighs, and in this place between salt and sky, the days wore down to habits so old no one remembered who started them. In such a village, stories clung not to facts, but to feelings. They slid between the cracks of memory and creaked under the weight of unsaid things. Here neighbors nodded in the street, but rarely lingered. And behind every door lived someone watching the world go on in silence. It was in the midst of this hush, a silence threaded with longing and old wounds, that the letter would arrive. It came every year, its envelope sallow from rain and sea air, always addressed to a name that tugged and slipped away at the edge of everyone's mind. There was something haunting in its regularity, like the tide or the first call of gulls after the winter. Its arrival was never announced, but always noticed. One morning the postman would hesitate at the square, glance at the spidery handwriting, and leave it on the old stone boundary for someone to claim. No one could remember precisely who had brought it home last spring or the spring before. No one spoke openly of it beyond a shrug and a muttered joke at the pub. And yet, year after year, some hand would reach out and hide the letter away. Someone would open it in the thin light of their kitchen, and the words would make bare the places where they most wished to remain unseen. The letters were gentle, never accusatory. They asked softly if forgiveness was possible. They wondered if it was too late, if the thin thread of memory could still be held without breaking. Some years there was talk at the fisherman's table, a wager on the sender, a jest about ghosts. But the laughter was thin. Mrs. Radka, who had watched the village since the days when the schoolhouse was new and the docks were full of men, would shake her head and say nothing at all. Iveta passed the post office with her eyes lowered, troubled by the way the address echoed in her chest. Old Jarek, with his hunched shoulders and hands gnarled by cold, would not meet anyone's gaze for days after the letter was found, nursing some hurt no one dared name. And so the letter drifted each year through trembling fingers, kindling in its readers not outrage but bone-deep uncertainty. Whose sorrow was this? Whose apology? What would be forgiven if only they dared answer? Tomas noticed because he had little else to distract him. Casting his nets at dawn meant long, salt-rimmed hours with only the horizon for company. Men with families might turn inward with the night. But Tomas, with no one waiting for him, watched the village like someone reading a weathered map. He saw habits, saw absences, saw the way Mrs. Radka's breath caught on certain words, the way Iveta lingered by the church fence on Sundays, searching the faces of those who did not look back at her. That spring the letter came as it always did. Tomas found it first, peeling it from beneath a stone, the script wavering as though the pen had hesitated with every word. He brought it home. He read it. It was no different than the others he'd heard about. Dearest, if you remember me, if these lines find you still in this world and willing to listen, I hope only that you will forgive the way I left, the words I spoke, the way I let fear and pride carve distance between us. Each spring I watch the sea and hope for a sign that all is not lost. I long to know if you are well, if the pain has faded, if memory might one day become kindness again. Please, If you have it in your heart, write me, or at least think well of me somewhere." The day he read the letter, Thomas caught himself in the mirror, surprised by the wetness in his eyes. He wondered who might be waiting for forgiveness, which of his neighbors was carrying this grief in silence, and why, in all these years, not a single reply had been sent. That night Thomas drank his tea alone and decided quietly that he was tired of waiting for someone else to ask. The next day he went to the docks earlier than usual and found Mrs. Rodka sitting on her usual bench, buttons fastened to her chin, though the morning was soft. He sat beside her, letting the wind fill up the empty space. "Have you seen the letter this year?" he asked, careful not to sound eager. Mrs. Rodka's hands paused on her knitting. "There's always a letter, whether anyone cares to read it. Don't see that it matters." But her eyes darted to his for a moment, and Thomas felt something in her stiffen. "You ever wonder whose it is?" he pressed gently. "Not any more," she said, setting her knitting aside and looking out across the gray water. "Some aches are better left alone." But Thomas did not think so. He noticed the way Iveta flinched when the bell at the post office rang, how old Yarek's steps slowed past the house where no one lived now. These small things, barely more than breaths, added to the mystery. Over the following days, Thomas made himself available in doorways and at garden fences, waiting for talk to rise and spill over. He asked about the letter in quiet tones, and at first people shrugged him off, but the questions lingered like the odor of rain. One evening at the pub, Thomas tried again, feigning indifference. "Strange, isn't it? Every year, always addressed to that odd name." "Maybe they're dead and don't know it," one man grumbled. But Iveta at the far end of the bar went pale. Thomas watched her slip outside. The search became an itch Thomas could not leave alone. He studied the village, recalled stories his father used to tell, old romances and sharper rifts, neighbors who left and never returned, names lost to time. Piece by piece, the silences fell into place, not as answers, but as invitations. At last, Thomas decided he needed to follow the oldest threads. It was Mrs. Rodka who unlocked another door, not with answers, but with a warning. "The trouble with bringing up old ghosts," she said, eyes shining with something fierce, "is that they come looking for you as well." The next week a spring squall rattled an abandoned house at the edge of the village. The place was seldom spoken of, a ruin with windows packed with salt and time. Curiosity and something heavier led Thomas inside. In the attic, beneath shattered beams, he found a bundle of letters bound with a faded ribbon. There was dust on the paper, but the ink had not wholly faded. Opening the letters, Thomas felt as though he was trespassing, but he could not stop. Each letter was a yearning, a reaching out. They told of two women and the village that kept them apart. Words pressed between caution and longing. Memories of a night when hope was torn from possibility by whispers and warnings and cold. The letters spoke of a promise to write every spring, to keep alive the hope that wounds could heal, even if both were forced to disappear from each other's days. Leaping through the bundle, Thomas pieced the story together. He recognized names, one now faded from the village memory, but still written every spring. The other, a hand he had seen in the church ledgers, trembling now in old age. It dawned on him with a force that hollowed out his chest. All this time the village had been living with the ache of a banishment It pretended to forget. The sender still walked the same streets, her hope pressed thin and quiet so as not to disturb anyone's peace, including her own. The letters had not failed to find their mark. They had only found an audience too tangled in silence to answer. Tomas's face burned with shame, not only for himself, but for all who had let the story fade, for those who had chosen safety over compassion and caution over kindness. Spring thickened in the air. Tomas, after many sleepless nights, went to old Jarek. He found him by the shore, staring at the horizon as if searching for a different time. "You knew," Tomas said softly. "You saw what we did back then. You never forgave yourself, did you?" Yarek's eyes filled in the pause. He shook his head, the lines of regret carved deep. "We all did wrong. No one says it, but we all know." "It's not too late, maybe," Tomas ventured, the new letter tucked in his coat. "For some peace, at least?" Tomas asked around quietly. He found others, Iveta, Mrs. Radka, a handful of villagers whose memories shimmered with guilt and longing. Together, uncertain but willing, they prepared for another kind of spring. When the season finally unfurled in soft green and rushes of cloud, Tomas sent word quietly through the village, "Come to the square, bring what you remember, and listen." They gathered, unsure at first, feet shifting on the flagstones as the wind pressed their jackets close. Tomas stood with the new letter in his trembling hands. He read aloud, voice breaking on the simplest words. "If this letter finds you, know that I have never stopped hoping. I am sorry. I wish for your happiness, for your forgiveness. I wish for peace between us all, if nothing more. I send this not expecting a reply, only hoping you will hear my heart." The words fell with weight, gentle but impossible to ignore. Some wept openly. Jarek covered his face with shaking hands. Iveta stepped close to Mrs. Radka and did not let go. Silence hung, dense with all that was finally being said. Then, and only then, Thomas turned and offered the letter back, not to any one person, but to the village as a whole. "It's ours now," he said, "and what we do with it, how we remember, how we forgive, belongs to all of us." The spell broke with laughter, with tears, with hands reaching for shoulders and old barriers falling away in quiet gestures. From that day, something in the village softened. Greetings lingered at the bakery counter. Mrs. Radka invited Iveta for tea, and old Jarek sat a little closer to others in the pub. It was not sudden, it was not simple. But in the seasons that followed, neighbors began to tend each other's grief as if mending a leaky roof, careful and patient. When the next spring came and the letter arrived again, because hope, like the sea, does not end, it was not hidden or feared. Thomas brought it to the square, and the villagers gathered, listening not only for what was lost, but for what might finally quietly be found. The tradition became one of gentle remembrance. The letter's words, even if unanswered, stitched the community together, a sign that the hardest truths could lead not to bitterness but to belonging. From the hush of old pain grew a promise, the courage to ask, the patience to listen, and the willingness at last to forgive. Alden rises before every dawn, the world still blue and blurred at the river's edge. In his hands the pole is familiar as old grief. His boat rocks between mud banks, framed by the hush of reeds and lapping water. Along this ancient river wrapped always in mist, he does the small, unremarkable work of ferrying folk from one bank to the other. Sometimes couples, more often traders or weary farmers. He nods when spoken to, accepts their copper, and keeps his stories folded up inside himself like a sealed letter. Solitude wears at him. He feels it most when the fog is thick, turning the world to silence and shapes he half remembers. Almost every night some tune or face slips away, but he's come to believe that's just old age, or perhaps the effect of so much mist seeping into a man's bones. Memories fade. Everyone says so. Nothing strange in that. Or so he thinks, until the evening the stranger appears. Shadows gather under his brim, and the lantern shivers in the thickening fog. The wind carries a faint song, familiar, and then not. He lays out his oars when a black blot disjoins from the shadows at the near bank, shaped like a person, yet somehow indefinite. The stranger's cloak catches the lamplight, shudders against the damp air. "Ferry to the far side," the voice says, low and urgent. Alden studies the face, barely visible under the cowl, sees tired eyes, the ache of someone carrying too much. "Few cross after dusk," Alden murmurs. The stranger's hands tighten around a small wooden box, grain flickering in the lantern glow. Tonight it matters. The river snakes out beneath a fog so thick it could be dream or lake or grave. Alden gestures, wordless, and the stranger sits rigid on the worn plank seat, clutching the box like a child with a keepsake. They push off. Water folds around them. Mist tugs at his sleeves. Alden tries to quiet himself, humming that old river song that comforts travelers, but suddenly the tune escapes him, half thoughts where music used to live. The silence settles deeper. The stranger's breath is ragged, and when Alden glances sideways, he sees tears gleaming against the wood of the box. On the opposite shore, as the stranger steps out, Alden feels emptier, as if someone has slipped a page from his story. That night, alone in his hut, he tastes hollowness behind his tongue, a name on the tip of his mind, already gone. The next day, as the fog shreds around the morning sun, the river is quiet, no passengers. Alden sits on the bank, running calloused fingers over the railing, mind probing for the tune he knows he once loved. When a villager comes for passage that evening, Alden observes more closely. The woman's brow wrinkles, confusion raw in her eyes as they reach the other side. "Funny," she says, "thought I'd something to fetch, but—" She trails off. In her voice, a hollow like his own. Alden watches his chest tightening as the pattern repeats with others. Laughter erased, tales retold. Each crossing stains them paler, emptier. Alden feels the drain. Puzzle pieces vanished from his own life. The way his mother's voice used to sound. The favorite childhood game, even the comfort he took in the early light. Fear prickles, scuttling up his spine, and yet he returns to the bench each day. He needs the voice of others. Without company, the emptiness closes in faster, the silence so absolute it crowds out even loneliness. So he does the only thing he knows, listens. He listens to the villagers' half-stories, the rumors of old curses running in the currents, the whispers about the heart of the river where the mist never lifts. "The river takes," the eldest ones mutter, "but sometimes it gives you back what you have lost if you ask for it true." He combs the riverbanks in the small hours, fingers cooling in dew, watching the fog coil between reeds. He kneels, speaks to water as if to an old and patient friend. "What do you want from us?" What have we given you for all these years that you haven't already had? None answer, though sometimes the current seems to hesitate, as if listening. The stranger returns as Alden had known they would. Cloaked tighter, eyes wilder, the box clutched so fiercely Alden wonders what memory could be heavy enough to linger, what grief asks to be ferried again and again. Their words are few. "You forget, too," the stranger whispers as they glide into deeper fog. "You let it take from you, and still you return?" Alden shakes his head. "I'm tired of losing. Yet for you, why do you come back?" "To put things right," the stranger's voice cracks. "To remember who I am." In the silence, sitting together in the gentle rocking of the boat, their need hangs between them like lantern light in rain. As more crossings add up, the forgetting is sharper, knifing through Alden until he can barely recall what laughter sounds like. The faces of old friends, gone. The comfort of mourning, gone. Even his own name feels ghosted, just out of reach. Still, he rows and he wonders if this is all life asks of anyone. To keep moving toward others, even when you have less and less to give. Yet the box remains clutched in the stranger's hands, unopened. One evening, as thunder grumbles distantly and storm winds race the mist, Alden meets the stranger at the landing again. "Tonight," he says, exhaustion filling every syllable. "No more riddles. What is that box to you?" The stranger's face, shadowed, shifts, rain beads on lowered lashes. A long silence. "I came here years ago, and the river took everything. My family's names, the taste of harvest apples, the reason I left home. I heard a tale. If I could gather enough memory, keep it close, perhaps I could win them back. So I trapped what I could in this box. But it is not enough. The river always wants more. And so we both wither," Alden murmurs, voice raw. "Yes." Lightning forks far beyond the reeds, and the boat rocks beneath them, water churning. "I'm so tired of forgetting," the stranger admits, voice trembling. "Yet I cannot do this alone." Alden feels, amid his emptiness, a flicker, the old longing for connection, the ache that survives even when all else is stripped away. "Let us return it, then," he says, heart thrumming weakly in his chest. "Not to steal back what is ours, but to ask the river for mercy. Together perhaps it will listen." The fog deepens as they push into the current. The world narrows to two fragile figures, a wooden boat and the box heavy as a tomb between them. Rain makes halos in the lantern light. Water smudges the banks until up and down mean nothing. In the deepest band of mist, the stranger kneels and opens the box. A brittle fragrance, sweet and old, spills out with the smallest hum, as if 100 lost songs press at the air between them. Alden's hands shake. He cannot name what he has lost, only that its absence gnaws at him. The stranger's eyes close, lips moving in some half-remembered prayer. "We give you back what was stolen," the stranger whispers to the dark current. "Let it be enough." Together they set the box on the water. Alden pushes with the oar, and as the boat rocks, they watch it float into the heart of the river, where the current is black and silent. A moment's hush, too long for a breath, too short for a lifetime. Then the box slips beneath the surface, vanished like a dream at dawn. The world hushes. The mist unravels. For a heartbeat, Alden thinks nothing has changed, but then, soft and sudden, a warmth stirs in his chest. His mind clears, as if a window is thrown open in a house long shut. Faces return to him, bright as candle flame. His mother's hands at the bakehouse, his sister's laugh, the sound of his father's song drifting up from the fields. Memories rise, gentle as trout breaking the water, and he weeps, the tears unexpected and welcome. Beside him the stranger cries openly, their face, for the first time, shining clear and unguarded. "I remember," the stranger says, voice trembling. "My mother's green shawl, the name of the town, the taste of honey. I remember who I am." The fog thins as the river breathes out, ancient and tired, but lighter somehow. The water gleams in faint dawn's pale gold, and on the banks reeds sway like dancers greeting sun. They ferry quietly to shore, and the silence now is full, not empty, a waiting, a promise. The old boat feels right in Alden's hands, the pole answering as it once had. At the dock, Alden helps the stranger to the solid earth, and the world feels gentler, as if granting pardon. Alden stands for a long while, hand on the pole, lantern still burning, and looks down river. The current carries away the last of the mist. He thinks of all the crossings behind him, the faces lost, and those now returned. When someone next arrives at dusk, Alden greets them softly, voice richer, steadier than before. He listens to their stories. He answers their questions. No longer fearing what the river will take, he finds hope in what it can give back. Every crossing is a chance for warmth, a lantern's glow in the dark. The stranger visits often, sometimes in silence, sometimes bearing laughter that echoes old joys. Together in this place of fog and water and recovered memory, they make peace with what was lost and with what remains. Luca never planned to let the world know him. His life curled quietly along the edges of riverbank and tide, following the hush of dawn and the call of gulls more than any living soul. He moved through his days as if water itself, silent by inclination and fate, hands learning every frayed knot and salt-stiffened line along the battered wood of his small boat. Whispers passed about him in the crooked village by the sea, where the fog blurred the shape of sunrise, but Luca asked for nothing, leaving only footprints in sand and half-remembered kindnesses behind. The ocean was his only listener, a steady companion, holding his secrets when others tried to fish them out with laughter and loud talk. So it went, until sunrise brought something neither wave nor weather had ever offered, a current, unfamiliar as a stranger's hand, that set Luca adrift before he could read the sea's warning colors. The sky was gray and thick with longing, and in that stillness Luca realized he was not rowing home, but instead being drawn toward something both patient and hungry. When the sun returned, he smelled brine and soft moss. The sand, pale as memory, skittered beneath his boots as he staggered upon an island unlike any he'd known, quickly aware that no ordinary map would show its lines. It was a hush held so tightly, even the wind bent around it, and the silence pressed at Luca's bones with curious weight. It was not abandoned, though. Watching him from twisted trunks and drifting grass, he saw them. Children, faces, a careful balance of hope and wariness, their eyes gathering him like a long-expected letter, their lips sewn shut by somber rules neither storm nor sunrise could loosen. Luca raised a hand in greeting, found himself mimicked in kind. They circled closer, their steps careful as deer, untrusting but longing. The days that followed began as a sifting of sand and uncertainty. Luca, unthreatening and slow in his movements, showed his empty palms, learning the language of children who had lived entire lifetimes in silence. Mira, who stood apart not by age but courage, met his eyes directly, her hand drawing shapes in the sand to tell stories too thick for voice. She marked a circle for the island, dots for her small companions, and an odd mark, a broken line, through all of them, as if slicing life from the rest of the world. Luca watched the tides, made note of odd patterns in the sky and how the children shied from certain stones. At dusk he shared his meager catch, filleting fish with practiced care, gesturing toward the fire so as not to frighten them. Each time he divided what little he had, the light around them seemed to grow, pushing the shadows farther from where they huddled among the roots. But when hunger gnawed at his belly and he tried to take back just a little more, storms threatened in seconds. Wind shrieked through the trees. Rain clawed at their fire. No words were needed for this curse, each act measured in sun and storm. It soon became clear. The island was shaped by choices, bending its spirit in answer to every kindness or misstep. The children's eyes shone with gratitude after a loaf shared or driftwood gathered for warmth. But Mira, always watchful, pressed her finger to her lips or drew a reminder in the sand, a warning that every action was a thread in the tapestry that kept them all bound. Luca would wake before dawn, sometimes composing silent conversations in his mind, hands aching for nets and ropes that were nowhere to be found. Each day the urge to escape returned, burning bright as the noonday sun. He fashioned tools from branch and shell, gathering flotsam at the high tide mark. Pockets weighted with preparations he dared not show the children. But at night, when the air turned chill and Mira sat with the smallest child curled in her arms, Luca would feel the ache of her courage press against his own sadness. Once he found Mira staring out at the silent bay, her eyes rimmed red in the moonlight. She pressed her palm to his, tracing the lines between their fingers, hers shaking, his steady as tide. It was Mira who taught him how to listen for the song of the wind, how to sense the difference between helplessness and hope. She neither pleaded nor commanded. She simply trusted him to see the pain behind each gesture, the quiet perseverance in each day's small routine. Over time, Luca learned the names of the children, from half-mime and soft looks, from the scattered trinkets they kept in shallow holes in the sand. In the evenings they began to gather around him, close as kin, listening to the imagined stories Luca sketched with pebbles and simple dance, yearning for memories of the world outside the island's rim. Across their growing trust, he found himself caught between the push of waves toward freedom and the gentle pull of belonging. When he turned his back to plan an escape, the air chilled, and when he drew Mira into the shelter of his arms during a thunderous night, the storm retreated. His choices colored the dawn. The pull between Luca's wish for home and his attachment to his companions grew heavy as fog. One evening, after a long chase for mushrooms among the twisted trees, Luca discovered a hidden inlet. There, caught on jagged rock, was the half-ruined shell of a boat. His own, but changed. Seaweed draped its hull and strange marks lined its wood, as if warning or invitation. For days he returned there, working by moonlight to mend the worst damage, careful to hide his hope from the children. Yet Mira's eyes seemed to see through every kindness, every hesitation. She never accused, but her silence deepened. Luca, torn and aching, pressed his head to the splintered bow, feeling equal measures guilt and longing. The night that changed everything arrived sudden and wild, the wind breaking through the trees like a warning. As lightning fractured the sky, the waves crashed higher, clawing at the parted shore. Amid broken branches and frightened whispers, Mira came to Luca carrying a simple thing, a small woven talisman, shell and thread knotted with care. She pressed it into his palm, her touch trembling but certain. In that soft darkness she met his gaze, her eyes speaking every unspoken word. Permission, sorrow, understanding. Luca understood. The sea would offer him one chance for freedom, a window of wind and water, if only he would leave the children to their silence. The world shrank to three things then: the wild pull of the waves, the wide grief in Mira's dark eyes, and the frail, shivering weight of a child's hope in his arms. Luca turned from the shore, from the boat repaired but not forgiven, and knelt among the children as the wind howled. The youngest wept without sound, clutching Luca's sleeve. Mira stood at his side, a frail profile against the storm. Luca raised his arms and wrapped the smallest children close, anchoring them all together. He looked up at the black maw of clouds, letting his decision carry out from the circle of warmth beneath his arms into the angry night. No words, only the strength of his embrace and the bare, burning wish that sacrifice could mean something. By choosing to stay, to bear the storm, not for himself, but for these quiet, grieving souls, Luca's spirit pushed against the island's old bindings. He expected nothing. If the sea reclaimed him, he would go with kindness on his skin and memory under his ribs. But when morning broke, it was gold and gentle, sun to heal the hurts of the night. The world had shifted. The island's air now carried faint music, a ripple where only silence had been. The children woke with voices, shy and light. Their laughter, hesitant as a bird's first flight, cut through the mist. Mira whispered Luca's name for the first time, her voice small but certain, and the weight that had clung to her shoulders like a shroud was gone. The children, once wary and strange, rushed the sand, calling to one another in tones that made the trees tremble. The curse, ancient and careful, had unraveled thread by the single act of a fisherman who had nothing but his arms to give. Luca listened, unable to join their chorus except in smiles and the tilt of his head. But now there was answer in every face. The island, no longer a prison, felt suddenly wide and alive. From that day onward, though free to go, Luca remained. The children flourished under the new light, curiosity replacing fear. Luca helped them recall old games and shambling stories, drawing memories out of each with the patience of a tide-smoothing stone. Myra, newly bold, led them in song and laughter, her courage as bright as the dawns that now came without storm's threat. Luca, voiceless still, found his silence filled by laughter and gentle touch, by the new rituals woven in sand and driftwood. Sometimes he'd stand at the edge of the water, toes in the tide, and watch the horizon as if it might call him away. But always he turned back to the warmth of his chosen family. It was not the home he'd known, not the world of nets and solitude, but it was a place marked by small miracles, soft hands in darkness, sunlight where touch and trust had scattered storm. Each sunrise was a reminder that the greatest curses can be unraveled by choices so quiet the world barely sees them. The sharing of a meal, the comforting clasp of a frightened child's hand, the decision to choose someone else's freedom over one's own. Luca's life became the gentle engine that warmed the island. He walked with patience, mended what needed mending, gathered what time and tide brought. He was never less alone, having found in his silent steadfastness the true heart of belonging. The island sang in its own shy way, birds nesting where sorrow had once rested, laughter echoing around twisted trunks where once wind only whispered. And above it all, Luca's choices, a stubborn string of kindness, echoed softly through each new dawn, a reminder that compassion has its own quiet voice, breaking even the oldest chains.